Coming up today, President Park Geun-hye and the nation's other political leaders pay their respects to the people who were killed in the April 19th pro-democracy uprising in 1960. South Korea, the United States and Japan are set to hold vice-ministerial talks on North Korea's nuclear missile threats. Washington says it will respond strongly to a fifth North Korean nuclear test. Plus, South Korea's central bank adopts a wait-and-see approach, freezing its key rate for April at a record low, 1.5% for the 10th straight month. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Tuesday, the 19th of April. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. So it is April 19th here in Korea, a day when Koreans remember the April 19th revolution. The movement was Korea's first ever democratic uprising against the government, taking place on this day in 1960. Tens of thousands of people, mostly college students, rose up against election fraud by the then President Lee Seung-man. Around 180 people died and thousands were injured in clashes with police. The uprising led to Lee stepping down as the country's autocratic leader 1 week later. Now, to remember the day, President Park Geun-hye paid her tributes this morning at the April 19th National Cemetery in northern Seoul. The leaders of Korea's main political parties also attended ceremonies to commemorate the day. The ruling Saenuri Party's interim leader Won Yu-chul and the interim leader of the main opposition Minju Party of Korea, Kim Jong-in, were both at the ceremony as well. The leader of the minor Liberal Justice Party was also there. Co-leader of the centrist People's Party, Ahn Cheol-soo, will soon pay tribute at a memorial set up in Democracy Park in the southern port city of Busan. South Korea, the United States and Japan are keeping the pressure on North Korea for its continued nuclear and missile threats. High-level representatives from the three countries are meeting today as speculation rises that Pyongyang might be readying yet another nuclear test. Kim Hae-sung has the details.
A strong message to North Korea is expected out of Seoul on Tuesday as top diplomats from South Korea, the U.S. and Japan get ready to meet in the capital. During the trilateral talks, Seoul's Vice Foreign Minister Im Sung-nam and his U.S. and Japanese counterparts Antony Blinken and Akitaka Saiki are expected to talk about the implementation of multilateral and unilateral sanctions and are likely to evaluate China's efforts in pressuring its longtime ally. The vice minister level meeting is the third of its kind, with the last one held in Japan in January, soon after North Korea's fourth nuclear test. Prior to the three-way meeting, Seoul is also expected to hold separate bilateral talks with Washington and Tokyo. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's in Seoul for the trilateral talks, had previously warned that Washington will respond strongly if North Korea decides to forge ahead with a fifth nuclear test. Speaking to reporters following talks in Tokyo on Monday, Blinken said Washington would consider a number of possibilities, but added it would be premature to be specific. The official's comments come a matter of days after Pyongyang's failure to launch what the U.S. and South Korea believe was an intermediate-range ballistic missile. His remarks also come amid rising speculation that the rogue state will conduct its fifth nuclear test before its party congress in early May. Seoul's defense ministry said Monday that there are signs North Korea is in the final stages of preparing for another nuclear test. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
The UN Security Council has expanded the list of sanctions on North Korea to include more items that could be used to develop weapons of mass destruction. This comes after reports that the Sri Lankan government confiscated tens of thousands of dollars in cash from two North Koreans traveling through the country last month. Kwon Jang-ho with the details.
Maraging steel, flow-forming machines and laser welding equipment. These are some of the new items that have been added to the UN Security Council's embargoes list concerning North Korea. Most of these items are associated with the development of nuclear weapons and missiles. For example, maraging steel is a type of reinforced steel that is used for the fuselage of planes and reportedly used on North Korean missiles. flow-forming machines are key pieces of equipment in the production of nuclear centrifuges. A list of 14 chemicals that could be used in the production of chemical weapons has also been added to the list. These additions were added to the UN Security Council resolution that came into force at the beginning of March in response to North Korea's nuclear test and long-range missile launch earlier in the year. It also emerged on Tuesday that authorities in Sri Lanka stopped 2 North Koreans carrying $168,000 in a bag while transferring through an airport in the capital, Colombo. According to South Korea's Yonhap news agency, they were stopped on March 14th and they were traveling from Oman to Beijing. It's the first time North Koreans have been caught moving cash since the UN sanctions blocked the regime carrying out all financial transactions with other countries. The men said they were carrying wages for their colleagues who had been working in Oman. The money was confiscated and the men were fined roughly $700. The North Korean government has demanded the money to be returned, while the men are still believed to be held at a hotel near the airport. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Now, staying with North Korea, and the regime is reportedly pushing its local goods on tourists to the country in a bid to bring in more foreign currency. According to sources close to the north, the reclusive state expanded its tourist attractions during the international marathon that was held in Pyongyang last week, focusing mostly on selling domestically produced goods. Sources add that, depending on the quantity and category of product, North Korea has been dishing out tax exemptions and waiving baggage fees. Now, many believe North Korea is doing all it can to rake in foreign currency after the international community slapped the harshest ever sanctions on the regime for its 4th nuclear test earlier this year. South Korea's central bank has held its key rate steady at 1.5%, and despite the weak recovery momentum, the latest decision diminishes expectations for more easing that had piled up prior to last week's general election. Hwang Jie has the details.
At its monthly monetary policy meeting on Tuesday, the Bank of Korea kept its key interest rate unchanged at a record low of 1.5% for the 10th straight month. The rate freeze comes despite slumping exports and fizzling domestic demand that have put the central bank under pressure to cut the key rate. Korea's outbound shipments plunged for the 15th straight month in March, marking the longest downslide the country has ever posted. But the March figures did show a slight improvement as the pace of decline slowed, dropping around 8% from a year ago. Korea's exports posted double-digit drops from December last year until February this year. Consumer and business sentiment are also showing signs of a pickup, although analysts say figures through the second quarter should be carefully monitored. With that, the central bank is continuing its wait-and-see approach since many economists, including the central bank's governor Lee Ju-yeol, have been raising concerns about the side effects a rate trim could have on the economy. Lee reiterated his stance recently, saying the BOK is cautiously managing its monetary policy as it could be dangerous to change the key rate when the country faces various external uncertainties. Still, market expectations for more rate cuts are lingering as major financial institutions like the IMF recently slashed Korea's growth outlook for this year to below 3%. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Now, as a follow-up to that report, the Bank of Korea has cut its growth outlook for this year to 2.8%, down 0.2 percentage points from its earlier projection of 3%. The central bank's forecast trim is in line with other major financial institutions that expect Korea to grow in the 2% range in 2016. We will bring you more details on the downgrade in our next newscast, which is coming up at 3 p.m. Korea time. Now, the head of the International Monetary Fund says women's contribution to the world's workforce can be a game changer for global growth. During a Q&A session on Twitter Monday, Christine Lagarde said Japan's GDP would be 9% higher and the GDP of India would expand by 27% with gender parity in the workforce. She said the IMF's measures to raise global economic growth combine structural reforms, fiscal policies and monetary policy that need to be growth-friendly and tailored to each and every country. She cited Britain's possible exit from the EU, the refugee crisis in Europe, and the risk of terrorism as among the top geopolitical risks to the global economy. Now, the death toll from a series of earthquakes in Japan has risen to 44 as rescue workers continue searching for the missing in the worst hit areas of Kyushu Island. Our Kim Jong-soo has more.
Rescue workers are racing against time to find 9 people missing after the devastating earthquakes that hit Kumamoto Prefecture last week. A coalition of Japanese military, police, and firefighting forces was dispatched to the area before the 72-hour golden window for finding survivors closed at 1 a.m. on Tuesday morning. After the window closes, the possibility of survival for the missing drops to near zero. One woman is holding out hope that a neighbor could be found.
I really hope she's alive. If she's there, I hope she's just stuck in an air pocket somewhere. Though the best scenario is that we find out she never went home and went to a relative's house instead.
The search and rescue efforts have been complicated by landslides that have cut off major transportation routes. On top of that, 2 men who have been taking refuge in Kumamoto's earthquake shelters were diagnosed on Monday with norovirus, a highly contagious disease that can cause nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. The men have been quarantined and are undergoing treatment, according to Kumamoto's local government task force. Kumamoto Prefecture said the task force will take the necessary steps to prevent the spread of the disease, which is transmitted by contaminated food or water and person-to-person contact. In response to the tragedies, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has said the number of troops helping with the rescue effort had risen to 25,000, and the U.S. military would provide air transportation. Kim Jong-soo, Arirang News.
Now, the full extent of the damage from Saturday's massive earthquake in Ecuador is becoming more apparent as rescue teams enter isolated inland areas in that country. Government officials say the death toll now stands at 413. More than 2,500 people were injured and thousands of families have lost their homes. Ecuador's president, who toured the damaged areas on Monday, said the government is trying its best to provide water and restore power to the affected areas. He said the cost of reconstruction will run into the billions of dollars. International aid has been pouring into the country from sources including the Spanish Red Cross and the United Nations Refugee Agency. The race to the White House is picking up a head of steam on the eve of a crucial pair of primaries in New York. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, if they score big in the Big Apple, the 2 frontrunners could find themselves within touching distance of their respective nominations. Kim Il-gyun tells us more.
A total of 291 Democratic and 95 Republican delegates are up for grabs in the New York primaries. According to the Associated Press, as of Monday, Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton is leading with 1,758 delegates to Bernie Sanders' 1,076. The Republican frontrunner Donald Trump has 744 delegates, while his closest rival Ted Cruz has 559. The magic number of delegates for the Democratic nominee is 2,383. For the Republicans, it is 1,237. Monday is the last official day of campaigning for the primaries. The candidates have been continuing efforts to sway the minds of undecided voters around New York. Clinton met her supporters in Queens earlier in the day and urged them to participate in Tuesday's vote. Bernie Sanders has been throwing a concert in a park set against the backdrop of Manhattan's skyscrapers. Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner, has been holding a rally in Buffalo, a Rust Belt city recovering from economic decline. Ted Cruz has been campaigning across various parts of the Big Apple, while the other GOP candidate in the race, John Kasich, has been stumping in Syracuse and Schenectady, 2 upstate cities. Kim Il-gyun, Arirang News.
Now, the Associated Press has won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service, considered the highest honor among the 21 award categories announced on Monday. AP's series documented cases of modern-day slave labor in Southeast Asia by companies that supply seafood to the United States and led to the release of at least 2,000 slaves. The LA Times won in the breaking news category for its coverage of the San Bernardino shootings last year, and the New York Times won the photography award for its collection of photos you can see there of the migrant crisis in Europe. The Pulitzers, now in their 100th year, are announced every April. Well, those are the stories we have for you on this Tuesday lunchtime here in Seoul. For more of the latest, don't forget to check out the website. You can do so by going to arirang.com/news. We also have a smartphone application. Just search for Arirang TV. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you're watching us. Goodbye.